Artificial intelligence is coming for the ATF. That's right. In a major story today by the Washington Post, it's reported that the DOGE team with President Trump and Pam Bondi and the whole administration is working to use artificial intelligence to cut down on crazy regulations all across the federal government, which, yes, indeed, includes the ATF. Very good news for gun owners, the gun industry, and our Second Amendment rights. Let's break it all down when we come back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Down, a proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. All right, so a major news story breaking out Saturday morning. It turns out that the Trump administration has deployed not just DOGE, which is the Elon Musk team of computer scientists to go all around the government, but is also deploying artificial intelligence to look at every single regulation in the Code of Federal Regulations, including, of course, the ATF, to try to see how they can cut back, streamline, and most importantly, get rid of regulations that are not legally necessary. This is a huge deal, because one of the greatest enemies of the Americans' right to keep and bear arms today are those unelected officials, those unelected bureaucrats, those deep state people at the state level and the federal level who are able to make stuff up and to construe and interpret statutes in a way that they were never intended, and interpret those statutes and apply those statutes in a way through regulations and other interpretations to be able to throw people, freedom-loving Americans, including gun owners, under the bus. And the fact is that the Trump administration is using artificial intelligence to compare actual congressional statutes, which is indeed, right? Federal statutes are indeed the law of the land, just below the U.S. Constitution. But then you have thousands and tens of thousands of these regulations that have been promulgated and passed and enacted by unelected bureaucrats going back decades and decades and decades that in theory are supposedly designed to clarify for the good of the order and the good of the American people what all those federal statutes enacted by Congress mean or how to be interpreted. But the reality on the ground is this, that the unelected bureaucrats responsible for creating those regulations over the last many decades had political agendas. And in many instances, those political agendas consisted of expanding the growth of government, expanding the power of government over our lives. And in many instances, those regulations went beyond the scope and the authority given to those administrative agencies by Congress. So, for example, just to give you kind of an example of how this worked and has been working, and Trump and the AI team and the DOGE team are working to fix this, is Congress might pass a statute that says something along the lines of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, can regulate and shut down anything that interferes with wetlands. And then what would happen is groups like the EPA would go out and they would enact regulations. Or if they didn't enact regulations, they would just say, this is how we interpret the word wetlands. And they would include things like and they would include in the definition of wetlands, little ponds in your backyard. And they would say, well, you have a wetland in your backyard consisting of that little pond that occurs every time there's a heavy rainstorm in the area. And that pond is a wetland now. And as a consequence, we, the EPA, can come in there, or the Corps of Army Engineers, or whatever the agency might be, and can come on in there and regulate your private property because we now have federal jurisdiction over it, because we, the unelected deep state bureaucrats of this federal agency, interpret the statutory definition of wetland given to us by Congress to include the little pond in your backyard. Now, the reality is the agencies were able to get away with this for decades and decades because unless they were going after somebody well-connected or with a lot of money, most Americans would roll over for this regulatory overreach, which allowed unelected bureaucrats, petty tyrants at the local levels, to basically mess around with our fundamental freedoms, whether it be the right to keep and bear arms or the right to property or the right to your income, whatever it is. And many people cannot fight back. They just didn't have the resources. So what's happening now is the Trump team with Pam Bondi, the DOGE team, and the like, they're all working together all across these agencies, all across the federal government, to shrink and eliminate all of these regulations and these interpretations that were put on the books by, frankly, big government, anti-American liberals, in my view, and they are now being eliminated. In fact, according to this reporting, all across the media today, they're talking about cutting 50% of the regulations in the Code of Federal Regulations by the first anniversary of Donald Trump's term, which is about 6 or 7 months from now. Now, it may take a little bit of time to actually effectuate that because it usually takes a comment and notice period. There's a process whereby you eliminate regulations or shrink them. That notice and comment period has to be done through the administrative process, which I'm sure the Trump administration will do. But it sounds like they're going to be able to identify, using AI, the vast majority of these regulations to be cut, including a huge number of ATF regulations. In fact, according to news reporting, there's discussion that as many as 50 or more ATF-related regulations are going to get revamped or cut or eliminated. This is a huge deal, folks, and a great thing because, again, all those regulations cut back on our freedom. Because in a free society, you are supposed to be able to do anything you want to do unless it is prohibited, i.e., if you want to do it, you get to do it unless it's prohibited. That is a different paradigm, a different concept than those that exist in tyrannical, totalitarian, not free societies, like the former Soviet Union, Russia today, China, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party now. In those societies, it works in reverse. You, as a citizen of those countries, are not allowed to do anything unless you first and foremost get permission to do it. See how it works? And yet here in America, because of decades and decades and decades of the rise of the so-called expert state, and remember, this is the euphemism, the political propaganda term that the left likes to use when they talk about these unelected deep state bureaucrats, and don't fall for this hooey. They like to say that these are the experts. They're the experts that know all about this stuff. And we have to defer to the experts like Fauci and the like. Don't fall for it, folks. These unelected bureaucrats that want to be held not accountable to anyone except themselves are the greatest danger in many respects to American freedom. Because there's no oversight. You can't fire them in many instances. And Donald Trump is working to get these people fired. But let's just get back to the story about the use of artificial intelligence to cut back on half of the regulations that control our lives at the federal level. This is consistent, of course, with the Trump views on deregulation of business, and this is good for the gun industry. Because the gun industry is a major industry. Not only do they supply us with ammunition, firearms, and accessories and the like, including scopes and glass, right? Guess what? Those are major American industries. Not only do they supply American military branches, not only do they supply police officers, they supply us with our weapons and the materials we need to effectuate our Second Amendment rights. And of course, this is a major industry for selling weapons overseas, right? We export defense materials to our allies and get paid for it. That's what's happening apparently in this Ukraine fight, right? Under Joe Biden was just giving away all of our stuff to the Ukrainians to fight the Russians. Good, bad, or ugly. I'm not going to talk about that in this video. But the point is that change has been made, that Donald Trump is now okayed selling arms to the Ukrainians to be paid for by the Europeans. And that's fine. That's just a business transaction. People want to buy our stuff. They want to buy our cattle, our guns, our material, whatever it is. Assuming it's in our national interest, we should be selling it. It's good for business, good for the employees that work in those industries. And of course, if you're dealing with anything touching fingers with firearms in the defense industry, by extension, that helps our Second Amendment rights. We want a robust Second Amendment infrastructure, which includes the ability to buy weapons. And that is why in 2005, people often forget this, but this is important to keep in mind. In 2005, Congress enacted the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, PLACA. And that was passed not only with the support of the entire Second Amendment community, like the NRA, it was also enacted with the support of the Pentagon and law enforcement. Because again, if you don't have people making guns and ammunition and the like, there's no way for us to acquire them. Yeah, you can in theory make your guns, but most people are not capable of making a reliable gun. I know I'm not. You have to buy these things. And that's what most people do, of course. So let's move on. Keep in mind that this deregulation process that's going to be used by this artificial intelligence not only helps us with the ATF, where they're literally talking about cutting down on the number of inspectors by over 500, which is great. Because in my experience or my views, those inspectors that go out and look at FFLs, in many instances, they don't really know the difference between what's a serious problem, what is not a serious problem. And in some ways, allowing the more senior people to say, well, that's just a paperwork error, who cares? As opposed to, no, that's evidence of actual gun trafficking to straw purchases in the cartel. Those are different fact patterns. And it's important that we have people at the ATF that can draw that distinction, which is, I think, what Pam Bondi and her team over there at the ATF are laser focused on, making sure that everything that's done at the Department of Justice is about stopping violent criminal thugs, terrorists, cartel members, and the like, as opposed to messing around with ordinary American businesses just trying to get ahead in a small community because of some ridiculous paperwork error. And that is a key distinction this administration and the Department of Justice is honed in on. And this artificial intelligence deployment that's being talked about today all over the news illustrates that point. The only other point I want to make that relates to this is, and this is very good news, because a lot of people will say to me, Mark, when it comes to artificial intelligence, how can we make sure that this is not biased? So that's a good question. But as you saw this week, the Trump administration just unveiled a huge set of orders, if you will, really executive orders outlining policy preferences, pointing out that we want to be the world's leader in artificial intelligence, which is very important, and I agree with that goal, but also pointing out that it's important that and this is what the White House said, that the American development of AI systems must be free from ideological bias or engineered social agendas, because with the right government policies, the United States can solidify its position as the leader of artificial intelligence and secure a brighter future for all Americans. But of course, this requires it to be not biased. What we don't want is when you do a search about the Second Amendment, you get nothing but anti-gun stuff coming back at you. And I think all that is understood to be an issue and is being addressed now. So anyway, I just wanted to give you the good news about all this reporting that there's a good chance that half of the federal regulations in the United States promulgated by these unelected bureaucrats may be going bye-bye in the next 6 to 9 months by virtue of DOGE's use of artificial intelligence to compare the federal statutes that give rise to the authority to promulgate regulations on the one hand versus the regulations themselves. And by comparing the federal statutes given by Congress, which is the law of the land, with the actual regulations and interpretations of those laws on the books by these unelected bureaucrats, by comparing and contrasting these things using artificial intelligence and the DOGE team and brilliant people like guys like Rob Leiter, who is the chief counsel over the ATF, and other people at DOJ and these other agencies, by combining all this stuff into sort of a gestalt, I think you're going to get to some fantastic outcomes, not just for American business, which we need, but also for American gunners. And remember, it all works together, because if we don't have money, if we don't have wealth, if we don't have resources, well, it's not that easy to buy stuff, including our right to keep and bear arms, to buy guns, ammunition, and the like. It all works together. We want America to be successful in all respects as the leader of the free world. And I think we're on the way to restoring confidence all around the world in America, the traditional America, the heritage America that we all know and love, and not some fake hollowed out America, which is America in name only. That's where we are going, and we are not doing that anyway, thanks to the Trump administration and to the supporters like the people who watch this channel. So there you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you follow me on X at @4boxofdiner. Don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and to Rumble, and I look forward to talking to all of you again real soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.